Why are you unharmed?
My mother-in-law had an accident while driving my husband's car and was transported by ambulance while unconscious. The doctor said tonight was critical, and when I contacted my husband, he responded with, "Why are you unharmed?" Realizing his slip of the tongue, my husband tried to cover it up, but I couldn't hear anything beyond that. I managed to maintain composure and informed my husband only about the hospital, quietly ending the call. At that moment, memories of my husband's unnatural behavior flooded my mind. Later, a single email on his phone revealed a shocking truth. My name is Charlotte Brown. 14 years ago, I married my husband who worked at an auto repair company, and at his request, I became a full-time homemaker. However, the once kind husband gradually revealed his true nature. After our daughter was born, he started verbally abusing me, calling me a parasite leeching off his earnings at every opportunity. Despite growing frustration, I couldn't work outside the home while caring for our young daughter, so I endured his behavior. Eventually, when our daughter entered elementary school, I managed to secure a part-time job. A year later, my work performance was recognized at the company, and my supervisor proposed, "Why not become a full-time employee?" Honestly, I felt more suited to working outside the home than constantly gauging my husband's mood as a homemaker. So, I mustered the courage to discuss this with my family. My daughter cheered, saying,
"Mom, do your best at work. I'll help with household chores."
She was genuinely thrilled. However, my husband remained silent, observing her enthusiasm with a displeased expression. Finally, he spoke, dripping with sarcasm.
I suppose this is just a pity offer to make you a regular employee? You'll start complaining soon enough. You should drop the idea.
When I insisted, "You won't know until I try," he retorted.
Oof, I earn enough money anyway. You don't need to be a full-time employee.
With our daughter's tuition fees and extracurricular activity costs, we'll never be in financial trouble no matter how much money we have. Unable to counter my argument, he grumbled.
Do whatever you want, but don't slack off on household chores.
With those words, he stormed off somewhere. Regardless, I was delighted to have persuaded my husband, and I couldn't help but share the news with my mother-in-law. She had endured her late domineering husband and became a reliable ally who scolded my husband when necessary. She always cared about me and our daughter, so she was thrilled to hear about my career advancement. As a full-time employee now, I could focus more on work, thanks to my daughter's help with household chores. Consequently, my performance at the company continued to improve. However, my husband, displeased by my apparent enjoyment of work, began treating me worse. His behavior escalated day by day.
Hey! There aren't enough side dishes. You need to prepare at least 5. There's dust in the corner of the room. Did you skip cleaning?
Despite never showing interest in household matters before, he now nitpicked every detail. Little did I know that his company was struggling financially, and his salary had been significantly reduced. I wondered if his harsh treatment toward me was related to his own frustrations. Wanting to lift his spirits, I decided to prepare his favorite seafood gumbo. But when he saw it, his face turned crimson, and he approached me angrily.
What's this?
I made it to cheer you up since you seemed down lately.
Damn it! Is this some kind of mockery toward pathetic me?
He shouted at me, pushed me, and then began slamming the pot and ingredients onto the floor. My daughter and I huddled together in a corner, unable to do anything.
This is what happens when you anger me. Clean up properly.
Then, my husband, who had overturned everything on the table, left the room with a satisfied expression. After that incident, my husband started coming home late from work more frequently. When I asked him about it, he explained that he was staying at the office late to study and obtain certifications in hopes of increasing his salary. However, on the days he worked overtime, there was always a distinct shampoo scent that didn't belong to anyone in our household. Could it be? A suspicion crossed my mind, and the word divorce flashed before me, but I couldn't confront my husband. Growing up with a single parent, I had experienced unpleasant situations, so I hesitated to take the step of divorce, especially considering our daughter. However, something changed abruptly. My husband's attitude shifted. On days when he returned early from work, he actively helped with household chores and even assisted our daughter with her homework. The drastic change left me bewildered. Perhaps the company's performance improved, and his salary increased? I wondered. Gradually, I began accepting this transformed version of my husband. One day, something unexpected happened.
By the way, didn't you mention wanting to wash the car soon? I'll do it at work, so lend it to me.
Oh, I can handle it myself.
Don't say that. I've been tough on you because work hasn't been going well, but I'm not saying this makes up for it, but let me take care of the washing. Oh, and I'll do a quick inspection too.
I was honestly surprised because he had never made such an offer since we got married. However, when I looked into his sincere eyes, I decided to ask for his help.
You need a car for shopping and other things, right? Since the inspection will take about a week, go ahead and use my car during that time.
I can manage with my bicycle for commuting and shopping.
No. Rainy days can be tough for shopping. Use it without hesitation.
Given his strong attachment to cars due to his profession, I hesitated to drive his car, fearing any mishaps. Yet, he persistently encouraged me. Despite feeling slightly uneasy about it, I eventually accepted the keys he practically forced upon me. Still, I couldn't bring myself to drive his car, so even after 2 days of borrowing it, I continued commuting and shopping by bicycle. One day, my mother-in-law visited our home with souvenirs from a trip. Since I had a weekday off, I invited her inside, and we sat down for tea. During our conversation, my mother-in-law mentioned that she wanted to take the souvenirs to a friend who lived in the neighboring town. She asked if she could borrow my car for this purpose. Since my mother-in-law doesn't own a car, she occasionally borrows mine. However, on that particular day, the car available at home was not my usual one. It was my husband's. I explained this to her, but my mother-in-law insisted.
It's only about a 30-minute round trip, so it'll be fine.
She got into my husband's car and drove off. However, an hour passed, and she still hadn't returned. Why hasn't she called? She always does when she's running late. As I waited, wondering if she was engrossed in conversation with her friend, the home phone suddenly rang. When I answered the phone, thinking it might be my mother-in-law, it turned out to be the police. They informed me that my mother-in-law had been driving and mistakenly hit the gas instead of the brake, crashing into a nearby convenience store. Fortunately, there were no casualties, but my mother-in-law was in critical condition and unconscious, taken to the hospital. I immediately tried calling my husband, but he didn't answer. In a panic, I rushed to the hospital. However, the doctor's words there were cruel.
This is the turning point tonight.
My mind couldn't process the sudden situation, but I knew I had to contact my husband. I called him repeatedly until he finally picked up. However, his response was beyond belief.
Why are you unharmed?
I was dumbfounded. He quickly backtracked, claiming he was too shaken. But his shocking words left me speechless. I relayed the hospital's name to him and hung up quietly. Earlier, what was that all about? The suspicion toward my husband lingered in my mind, but there were more pressing matters. Lying on a hospital bed in the emergency treatment room was my mother-in-law, connected to numerous tubes and IVs. Her painful appearance left me speechless. Despite the doctor's diligent efforts, my mother-in-law never regained consciousness and peacefully passed away. She was such a kind soul. The moment I learned of her passing, I collapsed in tears right there. An hour later, my husband arrived at the hospital with our daughter. They, too, sobbed alongside me, mourning the loss of my mother-in-law. I observed from a distance as they grieved, but my attention shifted to my husband's phone, casually placed nearby. Just then, a timely message appeared on the screen, and the short text caught my eye. My heart skipped a beat. Did the plan succeed? Indeed, the message explicitly stated that. What is this? What does it mean? Despite my agitation, I wanted to understand the context. So, I pretended nonchalance and handed the phone to my husband. Hey, someone sent you a message. His eyes widened in surprise as he snatched the phone from my hand. Why are you so flustered? His response was evasive.
Oh, thanks. It might be something urgent. I'll check it outside.
With those words, my husband hurriedly grabbed his phone and left for somewhere. As much as I wanted to tail him, I couldn't leave our still-crying daughter behind. The following day, my mother-in-law's funeral was conducted solemnly, and afterward, the police investigation concluded that the cause of her accident remained unknown. Gradually, daily life returned to normal, but I couldn't shake off the nagging feeling about the content of that email from before. So, one day, about a month and a half after the funeral, as the memorial service for my mother-in-law approached, I mustered the courage to check my husband's phone while he slept. However, what I discovered was a horrifying truth. Is it possible that such a gentle soul like her lost her life over something like this? My hand trembled with anger as I resolved to seek revenge against my husband. And so, the memorial service day after my mother-in-law's passing arrived. After the memorial service, my husband sat with relatives at a dinner gathering, reminiscing about memories with my mother-in-law. I watched coldly from the sidelines. As the alcohol flowed, my husband's face turned crimson, and he seemed to notice my gaze. Incoherently, he began to confront me.
Hey, what's with that look? Are you secretly glad Mom is gone because you disliked her?
That's not true. She was always kind to our daughter and me. I respected her.
Then why did you lend her my car that day? If you hadn't meddled, she wouldn't have been in that accident.
My heartstrings snapped at his words. I had blamed myself countless times for that incident, but I couldn't bear hearing it from him. The one who tampered with things to cause the accident is the real culprit here.
Huh? Tampered? What are you talking about?
In an attempt to play it off, he chuckled nervously. That's when I thrust my phone screen toward him. Earlier, I had covertly forwarded email exchanges from his phone to mine. Those messages revealed a sinister plan between my husband and his affair partner. They intentionally manipulated the brakes on the unfamiliar car I drove, intending to harm me. The email he received in the hospital, did the plan succeed? Was sent by the affair partner. Their ultimate goal was to collect insurance money after my demise and then flee abroad, leaving our daughter behind. Exposing this truth to our relatives, my husband's face was drained of color. He stammered.
I thought I'd already deleted the evidence. Why?
His panicked outburst confirmed his guilt. Later, As relatives bombarded my husband with questions, he stumbled over his answers, unable to provide a coherent response. I watched him with disdain. He lashed out at me, blaming me for everything.
Hey! It's all your fault that things turned out like this. Do something!
Isn't it all your fault? I'm going to tell the police everything, and you'll face the consequences. As I reached for my phone to report the incident, my husband finally realized the gravity of the situation. Sweat poured down his forehead.
Wait! I'm also grieving the loss of my mother. You know! Please don't report me! I'll break up with my affair partner. Mom wouldn't want to see me get arrested by the police.
Even if you break up now, it won't bring Mom back. Besides, she'd want you to pay for your actions.
Mom would never say that.
He lunged at me, but relatives restrained him. I proceeded to make the call. Just before they loaded him into the police car, he tearfully apologized, but my resolve remained unshaken. Afterward, I divorced my husband. The evidence I had became decisive, leading to the arrest of both him and his affair partner. Their malicious act of tampering with the car resulted in the loss of a life, and they are now facing approximately 10 years in prison. As for the $20,000 compensation I demanded from them, the affair partner's parents and my ex-husband's relatives each paid their share. When they re-enter the outside world, they'll be expected to repay it. On the other hand, I moved to a slightly distant place with my daughter, starting a new life. Despite our busy schedules with work and studies, we support each other and live happily.
How did you find this story? If you enjoyed it, consider subscribing to our channel. Until next time. I'm really sorry.
It's okay. Take your time and tell me slowly. Even though she was on the verge of tears, I gently encouraged my niece, who was trying to speak to me.
Well, actually...
Before saying anything further, my niece pulled something out of her pocket and played an audio recording. This is... I was shocked by the voice I heard and cursed my own foolishness. I had no idea the situation was so tragic and difficult. I wept at the overwhelming revelation and steeled myself for what I had to do next. My name is Kathy. I work at an IT company, where I am a hardworking career woman. Despite being a woman, I hold a position of responsibility and earn enough to live comfortably. Although I could live on my own, I live with my parents because my workplace is close to home, and I can also work remotely. I contribute financially to the household, and my parents prefer to live with me because they would be lonely otherwise. I have an older sister, who is 2 years my senior. She used to live happily with her kind husband and their daughter, Susan. However, her husband passed away from an illness 3 years ago. At his funeral, seeing my sister completely exhausted, I said, "Sis, why don't you come back home until things settle down? You also have Susan to think about."
Thank you for worrying, Kathy. But I'll be fine.
She refused to come back home. At the time, I found it a bit strange that she was so adamant about not returning, but I assumed it was because she was always strong-willed and didn't want to rely on our parents. She continued to work and raise her child as a single mother. Knowing the burden on her increased after her husband's death, I stayed in frequent contact with her. She always reassured me that she was fine, repeating the same response each time. Despite our communication, my sister fell ill a year ago and passed away. We took Susan, still an elementary school student, into our home. Since coming to live with us, Susan seemed very down. I remembered her as a cheerful and energetic girl when her parents were alive. She used to be so lively. Losing both parents in quick succession must have been a terrible shock. I wanted her to regain her energy as soon as possible. I often saw my parents trying to talk to her, but she didn't respond. On days off, I suggested we go out together, but she wasn't interested. Not wanting to force her, I didn't push too hard. About 3 months passed, and Susan started apologizing to me, crying when my parents weren't around.
Kathy, I'm sorry.
What happened? Did something bother you?
No, it's not that. But, I'm sorry.
I was taken aback because she had never cried before. Her sudden tears surprised me. However, she wouldn't tell me why, just kept apologizing and crying. But she didn't cry when my parents were around, which made me increasingly curious. Another thing that puzzled me was how my parents suddenly started going on frequent trips a few years ago. While it was fine for them to travel occasionally, I couldn't see how they could afford it on my contributions and their pensions. My father had only been a manager at a small company, and after retiring, he hadn't worked because I supported them. My mother had been a housewife all her life and had never worked outside the home. Despite this, I ended up doing most of the household chores. Mom, Dad, it's fine to travel sometimes, but please save some money.
You don't need to tell us that. We're careful with our spending.
I worked hard for you all these years. And we don't have much time left.
Don't say things like that.
Then let us enjoy ourselves. Stop meddling in our affairs.
All right. I tried to gently suggest they save money, but they brushed it off, saying they had little time left, which left me exasperated. Whenever they went on resort trips, Susan seemed like she wanted to tell me something but never did. I decided not to push her to speak until she was ready. A few months later, my father approached me, looking quite pleased.
Oh, Kathy!
Yes? What's up?
Your mother and I are going on a week-long overseas trip soon.
What? An overseas trip? How can you afford it? I just told you to save money.
We came into a bit of money.
From where?
Does it matter? Let us create some memories in our old age.
Your mother is right. Let us have this experience of traveling abroad.
All right, fine. Although I found it suspicious that they wouldn't disclose the source of their money, I decided not to pry any further, thinking it was their money after all.
We'll be off now.
Take care of things at home.
Got it. Have a safe trip. On the day of their trip, my parents left cheerfully, promising to bring back souvenirs. After seeing them off, I turned to go back to the living room and found my niece standing there, looking like she was about to cry. Realizing this situation couldn't continue, I decided to ask her what was wrong. Susan, what's the matter? Your grandparents have left for their trip. It's just the two of us now, so take your time and tell me anything.
I'm sorry.
As I gently asked her, she began to cry and apologize again. Unsure of what to do, I continued to encourage her.
Kathy, actually.
She took out her smartphone from her pocket and pressed play. The recording that played was filled with my parents' angry voices. What is this? No matter how I listened, it was clearly my parents' voices. However, they had never raised their voices like this before. I had never heard them shout like this, and I was shocked. Is this really Grandpa and Grandma?
Yes. They often came over when my parents were still alive.
Susan began to explain. According to her, my parents frequently visited her home when they were alive, constantly nagging and complaining. The complaints revolved around disapproval of my sister's marriage and irrational demands for money, claiming it was compensation for taking their daughter away. I was shocked to hear my parents were such people. Susan continued, saying they would often threaten her parents under the guise of visiting to see their granddaughter, extorting money from them.
Every time they came, I would hide in my room.
Your parents probably didn't want you to be frightened by their behavior.
I think so too. But I was always terrified because they were constantly yelling at my parents.
I see. That must have been tough. But how did you manage to record this? Susan explained that she had been given an old smartphone of her parents as a toy, and she happened to have it with her at the time, so she recorded their voices. I was grateful she had done this. I asked another question that had been bothering me. Susan, how often did they come to your house?
I think it was almost every week.
To think they visited my sister's family that often without my knowledge. Now that I thought about it, my sister and her husband had started to look more haggard every time I saw them. When I asked my sister if she was okay, she had said they were dieting together, which I had taken at face value. But in reality, it must have been the strain from my parents' demands that wore them down. I cursed myself for not pressing for the real reason. If I had noticed something was wrong sooner, this wouldn't have happened.
I'm sorry for keeping it hidden. But I was scared of what Grandpa and Grandma might do if I told you.
Susan began to cry again, and I held her close, regretting my lack of awareness. I'll protect you from now on, Susan. Don't worry.
But what if they do something to you too?
Don't worry about me. I won't lose to them. Let's get back at them together, okay?
Yes. If I'm with you, I'm not scared. Let me help.
Seeing the determination in her eyes, I nodded. During the week my parents were away, we made preparations. I felt even stronger with Susan by my side, so I asked her more. I recalled how frugal my sister and her husband had been. My sister had once told me they rarely carried cash, preferring to use bank transfers. If they gave money to my parents, it must have been through transfers. There would surely be some trace left. I began searching the house and soon found what I was looking for. I knew it. For all their greed, they weren't careful. Finding this passbook was too easy. I examined my parents' bank passbook and confirmed the amounts that had been deposited while my sister and her husband were alive. They transferred this much every month? No wonder they lived so frugally. Gripping the passbook, I trembled with anger. I decided to take the passbook to a private investigator to uncover the full extent of my parents' dealings with my sister and her husband. A few days later, I was summoned to the office.
Here is the investigation report.
I took the report from the investigator and began to read. No way. According to the report, my brother-in-law had been borrowing money from financial institutions to pay my parents. As a result, he became mentally exhausted and fell ill, leading to his death. As I read through the report, my anger grew even more. It turned out that my sister had been working herself to death, trying to pay off my brother-in-law's debts and my parents' constant demands for money. Additionally, my parents had been treating my niece cruelly when I wasn't around, saying things like they were doing her a favor by letting her stay with them. Knowing this, I started to cry. How horrible. How could this have happened without me knowing?
Furthermore, we discovered that your parents even took your brother-in-law's insurance money.
You can't be serious. I reviewed the additional report. It confirmed that my parents had indeed taken my brother-in-law's insurance money. They must have used that money for their frequent trips. I thanked the lawyer and headed home. Until my parents returned from their overseas trip, my niece and I prepared our plan.
Do you think we can do this?
Don't worry. We still have time, so let's practice as much as we need.
Okay. I'll do my best.
We practiced our plan until Susan felt confident. A few days later, we were ready and waited for my parents' return. We had set up several cameras around the house to capture everything on video and audio as evidence. Of course, I had discussed this with my lawyer and received approval.
We're home.
Welcome back. Did you have fun?
Yes, it was great. Where's Susan? We bought lots of souvenirs.
Susan's doing her homework in her room. You must be tired from the trip, so why not rest for a bit?
Yeah, that sounds good. How about some tea?
All right, I'll make it.
Shall I make it?
No, I'll do it. I always make your father's tea.
All right, understood. My parents returned home full of excitement. It was their first overseas trip, so they must have enjoyed it immensely. I listened to their travel stories for a while. Oh, sorry. I have to step out for a bit. I got a call from work.
At this hour?
It happens sometimes. I'll be back soon.
Take care.
Yes, I will. When I thought they had relaxed a bit, I excused myself, pretending to go to work. This was the signal for our plan. After leaving the house, I called Susan. Hey Susan, I've left the house.
Got it?
Susan kept our call connected as she went to my parents.
Ah, welcome back.
Oh, Susan. We brought back lots of souvenirs.
Well, thank you. But I need to talk to you.
What is it? Speak up.
Following my father's words, Susan played the recorded audio she had.
Hey, where did you get that?
Susan, be a good girl and give that to me.
My parents were visibly shocked and panicked by the recorded audio.
I plan to let Kathy hear this.
Susan, please don't do that.
Do you know what will happen if you do that?
But this isn't right.
We took you in when you had nowhere else to go, so you should listen to us.
Yes, if it weren't for us, we wouldn't be getting any welfare benefits.
Then why are you kind to Kathy?
My parents became furious and started berating Susan. Despite being on the verge of tears, Susan continued in a trembling voice.
We're nice to her because she brings money into the house.
That's right. We're living off your father's pension now, so we don't have money. If Kathy leaves, we'll be in trouble.
Exactly. As long as she's around, she'll always give us money when we need it. She's a convenient fool.
That's awful.
Hearing my parents' true feelings, I decided not to let Susan suffer anymore and headed back home. My anger, already at its peak, boiled over as I rushed into the living room. I heard everything. I burst through the door, raising my voice.
Oh, what? Kathy?
How long have you been here? What about work?
I don't care about work. I heard what you really think about me. You see me as nothing more than a cash cow and a housekeeper.
Of course. We're not working anymore. How else are we supposed to live on just a pension?
That's right. We need your help to survive.
They didn't deny it and instead shamelessly demanded money from me. The thought of staying in this house for their sake made me sick. If that's how you feel, I won't give you any more money. I'm taking Susan, and we're leaving. Don't ever contact us again.
I won't allow it.
How will we live without you?
I know everything. I know you took money from my sister and brother-in-law.
What are you talking about?
Susan, did you?
I'm sorry. I told Kathy everything.
Exactly. We have all the evidence, so don't bother arguing. I told Susan to get her things, and she nodded and went to her room.
Hey, are you serious, Kathy?
You're joking, right? You wouldn't abandon us.
No, I'm not joking. I can't believe you were such awful people. When Susan returned with her belongings, I took her hand, and we left the house. We stayed at a hotel near my workplace, as I had arranged beforehand. However, we didn't stay at the hotel for long. Within a few days, I found a new place to live. A few days after Susan and I moved into our new home, I received a call from the police. Really? Is that true? The police told me my parents had been arrested for shoplifting. No way. I had only been gone a few days. There's no way the money I gave them could have run out so quickly. Besides, they were getting welfare benefits for taking care of Susan. With these thoughts, I reluctantly went to the police as their guarantor. My parents, looking repentant, apologized.
I'm sorry.
We just made a mistake.
I apologized to the police and took my parents back to the house. With no money, the electricity, gas, and water had been cut off. The house was in a terrible state, reeking of filth. My mother had never been good at housekeeping, and it showed in just a few days. How did everything get cut off? Were you that broke? And what's with this mess?
Of course we're broke. We were enjoying our retirement.
I can't do housework anymore. I'm not as young as I used to be.
You took Susan, so we stopped getting welfare. My pension isn't enough to live on.
Exactly. If you had kept giving us money, we wouldn't have had to steal.
My parents angrily blamed me for their situation. I could only sigh at their absurdity. This is your own fault. How many times did I tell you to save money? Yet you kept going on week-long trips every few months.
Enough of that. Just give us the money.
Pay for the utilities. We can't live here without them.
And get a cleaning service. This place is uninhabitable.
They kept demanding money and blamed everything on me. I was beyond anger. I was simply fed up. All right. You refuse to acknowledge your faults. In that case, I'm done.
What?
What are we supposed to acknowledge?
I see. You won't admit your fault. Fine. This is the last time I'll speak to you. I'm cutting ties with you. Don't contact me again. I left the house. A month later, the house was vacant. The house, in my name, was sold, forcing my parents to leave. They had forgotten that detail. After some time had passed, I went to apologize to the neighbors for any trouble caused. They told me loan sharks had been lurking around, indicating my parents had turned to them for money. Rumor had it they were seen in a park, looking disheveled. Later, I legally separated from my parents and adopted Susan as my daughter. Now, we share a bond stronger than most parent-child relationships. Our life stabilized, and Susan regained her cheerful spirit, making me happy. I vowed to continue watching over her and make my late sister proud. How did you like this story? Please subscribe to my channel. See you in the next video.